was.
Welcome back. Tonight we're checking in. Hotels, temporary places, borrowed rooms, strangers sleeping on the other side of thin walls. Most people pass through without incident. The people in tonight's stories were not most people. I'd suggest keeping the lights on. She noticed it on the first night. The mirror wasn't facing the room. Someone had turned it toward the wall. She didn't ask why. She should have asked why. This is her account. The mirror in my room was facing the wall when I checked in, but the one in the hallway showed my door standing open behind me. I stood in the corridor for a moment, key card still in my hand, looking at the reflection of room 214. The door in the mirror was open maybe 8 inches. The door behind me, when I turned, was shut. Completely shut. I had just pulled it closed myself. I could hear the latch click in my memory from 10 seconds ago. I was staying in a mid-range business hotel outside Columbus, the kind with beige carpets worn thin down the center of each hallway, and a vending machine that hums too loud at the end of every floor. The walls were that particular shade of off-white that absorbs light rather than reflects it, and the whole place carried the faint smell of recycled air and someone else's soap. I had a conference the next morning, and I was tired in that specific way that makes your eyes ache behind the socket. I mentioned the in-room mirror to the woman at the front desk when I checked in. She said the previous guest must have moved it. She sent someone up to rehang it. The maintenance man flipped it back against the wall bracket, tested it with a small tug to check the bracket held, wished me a good night. I had room service around 8:30 p.m. Pasta that was too salty and a sparkling water I didn't finish. I watched about 40 minutes of something forgettable on the television, the blue light of it filling the room in a way that made everything beyond the screen feel very dark. By 10:15 p.m. I was ready to sleep. I remember thinking the room felt smaller at night. The ceiling seemed lower. The space between the bed and the wardrobe was tighter than it had looked when I first walked in. Tighter than it should have been. I woke up at 2:47 a.m., no particular reason, no sound I could name. I lay there looking at the textured ceiling and the orange strip of light coming under the door from the hallway. The strip was broken. 2 gaps, 18 inches apart. Something on the other side was interrupting it, low and still, the width of a person's feet standing close against the door. I watched the gaps. They didn't move for a long time. I counted slowly in my head, trying to keep my breathing even, telling myself it was a trolley left in the hallway, a luggage rack, anything with a base that low and that still. I got to around 90 seconds before the light under the door went back to a solid strip. I didn't sleep again. I sat up against the headboard with the bedside lamp on until my alarm went off at 6:30 a.m., listening to every small sound the building made, every distant door, every shift in the ventilation. When I finally got up to leave, I noticed the mirror. It was no longer facing the wall. Sometime between the maintenance man's visit and that morning, it had shifted, angled now toward the bed, toward where I had been lying. I stood in the doorway looking at it for longer than I should have. Then I picked up my bag and left without touching it. At checkout, I mentioned the light under the door to the woman at the desk, a different woman from the night before. She listened, nodded, and said the hallway motion sensor sometimes flickered. She said it happened on that floor occasionally. She said it like she had said it before. I didn't go back inside. I sat in my car in the conference center car park that night, still running the whole stay back through my head, and I looked the hotel up. I found a review from 14 months earlier. A guest described waking at 3:12 a.m. to the same thing. Broken light under the door. He wrote that when he opened the door, the hall was empty, but the mirror at the end of the corridor was angled differently than it had been when he went to bed, facing his room. He included a photo. In the reflection of that mirror, you could see his door, still open, and behind it, just inside the dark of his room, a shape that did not belong to any furniture listed in the room description. I have looked at that photograph more times than I should have. The shape is always the same height as me. The mirror in his photo is facing the bed. That next story is unsettling in a different way, because the threat wasn't something you could question or explain away. He was already inside when she arrived. She knows that now. At the time, she only knew one thing. Someone had a key to her room. Here's what she told me. My door opened at 1:09 a.m., and a man walked 3 steps into my room before he saw me sitting up in bed. I was in a hotel in downtown Portland, a nice one, the kind with heavy curtains and a turned-down service and little chocolates left on the pillow. The hallway outside had that particular hotel silence, carpeted and sealed, the kind that swallows sound whole. I had been reading with the lamp on, the warm amber kind that makes everything feel safer than it is. The man stopped when he saw me. He was average height, wearing a gray jacket, carrying a small duffel bag. He looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture that has been moved without your knowledge. Not scared, confused. He said he was sorry. He said he thought this was his room. He backed out and the door clicked shut behind him. I sat there for a moment. The lamp was still on. The room smelled faintly of the eucalyptus diffuser the hotel had placed near the window. Something meant to be calming. It was not calming. My heart was doing something fast and structural in my chest, less like a flutter and more like a warning. I got up, put the chain on, and called the front desk. The woman I spoke to was calm and apologetic in the practiced way hotel staff are trained to be. She said she would send security to check the floor. She confirmed that no other guest was assigned to my room. Security knocked about 6 minutes later. 2 of them. They walked the floor, checked the stairwells, came back and told me they found no one matching the description. They suggested the man had the wrong floor, maybe the wrong hotel. Key cards sometimes get labeled incorrectly by other properties. They left a card with the night manager's number and the door clicked shut again, and I was alone with the eucalyptus smell and the lamp and the quiet. I did not sleep. I sat in the chair by the window with the chain on and the lamp on, and I watched the door. The room felt smaller than it had before. Around 3:20 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow ones, with a deliberateness that ordinary footsteps don't have. They stopped outside my room. I watched the door handle. It moved down maybe 5 degrees, just enough to tell me someone was testing it. I did not breathe. The silence stretched out long and thin. Then the handle rose back to level. The footsteps moved on. In the morning, I went to the front desk and asked to see the key access log for my room. The manager on duty, a man in his 50s with a careful voice, told me they could run that report for the previous night. He stepped away. He came back 3 minutes later and his expression had changed in a way he was working to control. He said my room had been accessed 4 times during the night. Once at check-in when I arrived, once at 1:09 a.m., once at 3:21 a.m., and once at 6:02 a.m., 14 minutes before I had come downstairs. All 4 entries were registered to the same key card, my key card, the one that had been on the nightstand all night, which I had not touched after putting the chain on. He said the system must have glitched. He said it with the tone of someone who did not believe the thing they were saying. He held eye contact a beat too long, the way people do when they want you to stop asking questions. I checked out that morning and drove 4 hours without stopping. I kept checking the back seat at red lights. I kept the radio loud so the silence couldn't settle. For days afterward, I'd catch myself looking at door handles, watching for that small, downward movement. I still do not know how a key card I never touched opened my door 3 times while I sat 6 feet away from it. The last story is the one I find hardest to file away because there is no version of it that makes ordinary sense. The room wasn't on any floor plan. Staff didn't discuss it. Guests learned quickly not to ask, but one man asked anyway. This is what he found. Room 9 had a do not disturb sign on the handle for every one of the 4 days I stayed at that inn, but the owner told me on day 1 that no one was checked into room 9. I was staying at a small coastal inn in northern Maine. 8 rooms, family-owned, the kind of place with handmade quilts and a breakfast that came with real jam and soft butter in a ceramic dish. I was there in late October, off-season, and I was the only guest. The sea was close enough that you could smell it through the walls at night, salt and cold and something faintly organic, and the wind came off the water in long, low pushes that made the old building settle and breathe. Room 9 was directly across the narrow corridor from Room 7, which was mine. The sign was one of those old wooden ones, painted dark green with the words carved into it. It hung from the door handle when I arrived, and it was there every morning when I left for the day and every evening when I came back. I mentioned it to the owner, a woman in her late 60s named Margaret, on my second morning. She walked to the door, looked at the sign, and said that room had been closed since August. She took the sign off the handle and placed it on the small table at the end of the corridor. The next morning the sign was back on the handle. I stood in the corridor at 7:40 a.m. looking at it. The inn was quiet the way very old buildings are quiet, a deep structural silence underneath which you can hear the wood itself, the slow tick of beams carrying their own weight. The corridor felt colder than it had the evening before, though I told myself that was just the hour, just the draft coming under the front door at the far end. I put my hand on the door of Room 9. The wood was cold in the way an exterior wall is cold, not the way an interior door is, and this was a ground floor interior room with other rooms on either side of it. I told Margaret at breakfast. She looked at me for a moment without speaking. Then she said that room had belonged to her husband. He died in August. She said it plainly, without performance, the way someone says a thing they have had to say many times. She said she kept the room exactly as it was, and she had not opened the door since the week he passed. That night, I woke at 4:03 a.m. to the sound of a chair moving. The specific sound of wooden legs dragging across a wooden floor, the brief scrape and then nothing. It came from across the corridor. I lay there and did not move for a very long time. I watched the thin line of light under my own door and told myself it was the building. Told myself old places make noises that sound deliberate when you're listening too hard at 4 a.m. I almost believed it. In the morning, I came into the corridor and the sign was on the handle again. Below it, on the floor in front of the door, was a coffee cup, white ceramic, the same pattern as the cups Margaret put out each morning at breakfast. It was warm. I did not knock. I packed my bag and found Margaret in the kitchen, and I told her what I'd found. She walked to the corridor with me. She looked at the cup on the floor. She picked it up with both hands and held it for a moment, and then she looked at me and said very quietly that she had not put it there. She said she had not been in that corridor since the previous evening. She said her husband used to take his first cup of the morning and sit by the window in Room 9 before she was even awake. She said he did it every single day for 31 years. She set the cup down on the hall table and walked back to the kitchen without another word. I heard her set the kettle on. 3 rooms. 3 stays that didn't go the way anyone planned. If these stories have done anything, I hope they've made you a little more careful about where you sleep tonight. Thank you for listening. Stay safe out there. I'll see you next time.